Right, so I was wondering whether I'd dare weigh in on the latest Corbyn bashing set of events. I wasn't sure I could trust myself to not climb the walls in absolute fury and say a lot of very naughty words to camera in response to the rampant dishonesty that has been displayed. But I thought to myself, Damo, if the day comes when something happens and you think you're too angry to talk about it, you might as well stop. And no matter how many people comment on said videos saying that they wish I would, you ain't shutting this trap up anytime soon, my loves. And so I come to this week's episode of Peston, the epitome of establishment enablement, where Jeremy Corbyn got stabbed in the back by the odious right-winger Liz Kendall. Now, Liz Kendall, Labour MP, is the reason in the way that we have Keir Starmer as Labour leader now. She ran against Corbyn for Labour leader in 2015, you see, as the out-and-out Blairite candidate, further to the right than the other two candidates who stood at that time, Andy Burnham and Yvette Cooper. And they were in the arrogant and ultimately mistaken belief that the Labour member would never vote for an old lefty, and were, of course, very much all Blairites too. This was very much Team Liz's thinking. After all, look at how well Tony had done. Well, that arrogance delivered a shock to the system when Kendall took just 4.5% of the vote and came last. Corbyn beat her 13 times over because he actually stood for something, and people kind of appreciated that. You can tell just by looking at the turnouts whenever he spoke out in public. When have you ever seen Starmer speak in public at all, frankly? And when he does speak, when have you ever seen him attract crowds of that kind of level? Of course, Starmer is the product of the Labour right learning its lesson from Liz Kendall and going back to lying to get elected. He never would have won if we'd known who was funding him and that he'd tear up every promise he ever made to get the top job and then set about purging his own membership and going full red Tory on us all. Anyway, back to Kendall. She had the brass neck on live TV and to Corbyn's face to tell him that he only had himself to blame for having the whip removed by Keir Starmer for refusing to apologise over Labour antisemitism, repeating the scam, repeating the lie. You see, Corbyn has on many occasions apologised for any anti-Semitism present in the Labour Party. After all, it is a societal ill and exists in all major bodies, and you're kidding yourself if you think it doesn't. The scam was that the media fixated on Labour only, as if the Tories and other parties didn't have issues with racism and anti-Semitism as well, along with any other large public organisation. It was also a scam to pretend it didn't exist before Corbyn and doesn't still exist now under Starmer. Tony Blair once had to pull an infamously anti-Semitic piece of electioneering, taking aim at his then Tory opposite number Michael Howard, who is Jewish. Whilst Corbyn readily apologised for the harm anti-Semitism within the Labour Party has caused, he would not accept the narrative the right-wing media was desperate to propagate that it had increased under him or was anything like at the levels they implied. He wouldn't roll over and show his belly to the Rupert Murdoch and Lord Rothermere types, nor to any Tory journos like Coonsberg or Peston looking for a gotcha. On his side, of course, was the Ford report, grossly underreported as it has been in the mainstream media, which agreed entirely with Corbyn's assessment, along with the EHRC, who reaffirmed Corbyn's legal right to dispute the levels of anti-Semitism shown. Corbyn's initial suspension was even overturned by the party itself, by a right-wing panel, no less, of Labour's own national executive. The only reason Corbyn was again suspended is because Starmer, as leader, had the power to do so arbitrarily and immediately did so, keeping him out ever since. His justification was that Corbyn was breaching the terms of the investigation, should give a full and frank apology, despite what the EHRC had said, by voicing his protected right to say what he had said on the scale of anti-Semitism. To be honest, Corbyn could pledge to do a Game of Thrones-style walk of shame, saying sorry over and over while the Board of Deputies fling all manner of unmentionables at him whilst ringing bells and shouting shame at him, and Starmer still wouldn't reinstate him. Starmer only suspended him because he's terrified of him. Make no mistake about that. Of course, Starmer then repeatedly delayed, obfuscated and attempted to influence the Ford report as it was being produced, forced to do so as he was in response to that Labour leaks report, you might remember, which literally was breaching the terms of impartiality of that investigation, the ban on political interference. But a control freak like Keith just can't help himself. Incidentally, in response to the Labour leaks report and the ongoing Ford inquiry, Starmer, instead of acting on the allegations of bullying, harassment, racism and abuse the leaks documented, exposed, he was more interested in going after the people that leaked that leaked report. I mention this because just today, the Information Commissioner's Office has ruled there's no case against the 3 suspected leakers of that report. But Starmer has dragged this through the courts for so long and so hard, as desperate as he was to pin all of this on the left, And now Labour face a multi-million pound bill which may render them unable to fight the next election. That's the level of depravity we're talking about in the Labour leadership these days. Anti-Semitism is a societal evil, and where it is genuinely found, it must be challenged. However, those that cry wolf on such things should be vociferously challenged too, for they undermine utterly the fight against the real thing. This is exactly what the establishment media sought to do, and it was a scam. It brought down a political leader, which was the whole point of the idea, in the only way they could find to, though, by making up a pack of lies functionally when there was no real dirt to be had on him. He threatened the status quo that has led to our public services collapsing, a cost of living crisis, widespread loss of life due to the incompetence of the Tory response to the pandemic, and also their ineptitude when it comes to Brexit. One of the most excellent pieces of documental coverage of all of these events was the Al Jazeera Labour Files reports, all 4 shows. Essential viewing to really understand what went on. Do watch them if you haven't already. They're online. You will be shocked and appalled. Now, we can spout hypotheticals about how different it would have been with Corbyn in charge of the country, but in no way whatsoever do I believe it would have been worse than things have turned out since he went. I don't think so. He'd have run things for us and not for them, for the many, not the few. And now we have Starmer instead, who is just waiting for his turn to serve vested interests and not us, if he can still afford to. His treatment of Corbyn an audition for that based on nothing, as it is. The opportunity we lost is one of the most painful political experiences I ever witnessed. But the fact things are worse in Labour now under Starmer rubs salt in the wound even more. More Jewish members have been purged under Starmer than any other Labour leader, and all for the crime of being left-wing. He even got rid of the only Jewish member of his own party's executive under the often used trumped-up reason of having spoken to a group Keith then had proscribed, had banned, at a later date. Not enough is made of that ridiculous and abusive ruling that gets inflicted on unsuspecting members pretty much daily, just for the sake of getting rid of people the party leaderships don't like anymore. Kendall's condemnation of Corbyn and ass-kissing of Keith show they're two of a kind and they're welcome to each other. Because Labour won't see my vote again.